It's getting close to Halloween, and I was out hiking in one of our local state parks with my oldest child, Kat, just this last weekend. And we got to reminiscing about something that we had done much, much earlier back when Kat was just a child in the early 2000s, and not here in the Milwaukee or out in southeastern Wisconsin area, but rather in northwestern Indiana, similarly out in the countryside, but a somewhat different terrain than what we have here. And I asked Kat, do you remember the pumpkin farm that we used to go to? For a long time, it was just me and Kat, and then the next child, the one of two, was born, Maddie, and we began taking Maddie along with us as well as a little baby and then as a toddler. And this pumpkin farm was something, quite unique to the area. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about it and why we had so much fun, why it became something that we did over and over and over again and formed some great memories about. So that's what this Sadler Stories is going to focus on. So when I say that we lived in northwestern Indiana, we lived in Roselawn, which is, a little town on the county line in between Newton and Jasper counties. These are two very rural counties, lots of farming going on, not a lot of people living out there. It's in, around 18 to 19,000 in those counties. And there's a lot of space, a lot of forest, a lot of meadowland. Actually, that entire area used to be more or less underwater. It was the Grand Kankakee Marsh until it was finally drained. It actually had massive biodiversity, according to old stories and accounts about it. And so it got turned into an area where there's a lot of, scrub oak and autumn olive and other kinds of things growing in the area. And it tends to be rather flat with, a few hills here and there. And county roads basically crisscross it, north, south, east, west. And so we would go driving a lot. We would often have to go places, and because I liked the area and I thought it was kind of nice to take a scenic route, we wouldn't always take the most direct way, and so we would drive around and see what there was to see. And around, October, probably early October, this was, Kat would have been probably 3 or 4 years old at the time, we saw signs for this pumpkin farm. And, they were big signs, and they had kind of cool stuff on them. And I was like, we should go check it out. So we drove, following the signs down the county road, and then there's a driveway that you have to turn off on, and a gravel road that you go up a ways. And there it was. There was a place to go park your vehicles, and there was lots of stuff going on. Sometimes, I'll tell you, I don't know if it was the very first time that we were there, but other times there would be like school buses and, other things carrying kids. Cub Scouts would go there, Girl Scouts would go there, school trips would make a field trip to go there, because this had been around for quite a while. My relatives who lived in the area knew about it. And it had kind of a good reputation. So we would go there, and the first thing that you do is you go in and get yourself some tickets for the various things. And there was a place to go to the booth to get tickets for the various attractions, let's call them. And there was always a fire going as well, a campfire in a fireplace surrounded by stones with plenty of places where you could sit. So there was, nice smoky smell in the air. And there were, scarecrows and other things that were supposed to be kind of spooky and scary, placed in different spots. And, that time of year, it starts to get cold in the mornings and at night. And even sometimes during the day, it can be a little overcast. But for the most part, it's still, pretty decent weather. So you wear your flannels, you're not wearing a t-shirt anymore, and you dress up a little bit. But you don't have to bundle up as if it's winter or even late fall at this point. Although as you get closer to Halloween, there was always the chance of it getting cold enough to snow. So we'd go and, we would see the people. And after a while, Kat and I, and then Kat and Maddie and I went there so often that they all got to know us. They thought the kids were cute, and they knew me as the dad who would take the kid or kids to this place, and we would do it without any groups, right? So it was always us on our own. Sometimes we'd tag along with some other kids if there was a small enough group, and Kat would often, kind of outgoing, explain what was going on to the kids who were there for the first time. So I think the people who lived and worked there, because it was a family-run place, kind of got a kick out of the kids. And so, we would do things like, well, what should we do first? So one of the attractions that Kat loved and Maddie really loved was a train. Now, it wasn't the kind of train that you might expect. It was a big lawnmower, and there were 50-gallon drums that had, they'd been placed on their side, and they had, let's call it a passenger seat cut out of them. And so you would sit in the drum, and there was like a cushion for you to sit on, and they were all yoked together in this long train. And there was actually like a path going through the woods and a few scary things along the ways, a couple hills to go up and stuff like that. So it was kind of like a combination of a train and a really easy roller coaster, a roller coaster that's not going to loop-de-loop or anything like that. And the kids just loved it. And not just my kids, but kids in general. And it was run by a guy who had put on, an engineer's cap, and he had like his what do they call that, seersucker overalls that train people have, and he had a big whistle that he would blow that sounded like a train whistle, and off they would go with this lawnmower pulling this long chain of cars, I guess they were. I mean, they had little wheels on the bottom, and it was quite a production. So that was one of the big things that they would do. And then there were like trails that you could walk along, and they would go down into an area where there was a haunted house that you could go into, and you could buy tickets for that as well. After a while, they just kind of slip us tickets, give us extra ones. You go in the haunted house, and it wasn't huge or anything, but it was kind of fun. But what the kids really liked the most, I think, was as we would walk along the trails, there were various places where animals were living, especially goats. There were a number of goats that were in different areas, and they would come right up, and you could purchase food to give them. So it was kind of like a petting zoo. And the goats are kind of spooky looking with their weird little eyes that if you've ever seen goats, you know what I'm talking about. And they have different colors, and some of them were wandering around, some of them were behind a fence, and they're all pretty tame. There were chickens, there were rabbits, there were other kinds of animals, a couple dogs, and lots of stray cats as well. And so, that was kind of fun too. Towards the end of the season, they would have haunted hayrides that you could go on there. That cost a little bit more, but it was quite a lot of fun. And they would get local high school kids to dress up and come out with like a chainsaw, no blade on it, of course, but scaring you like Leatherface and things like that. So I would actually take the kids, because the kids they liked getting scared, and they weren't easy to scare either. So that was, compared to other children, that was something that I got a kick out of, and I think the park people did as well. So we would do these sorts of things, and then, they'd sometimes have bobbing for apples and other traditional Halloween sort of stuff. I think they also had like costume contests, but we never actually got around to doing that. We would do our trick-or-treating in other places, in the subdivisions that were near us or in the trailer park and things like that. And then they would also sell sandwiches and hot chocolate and hot cider and popcorn and a few other things as well. So we would spend our time, like maybe an hour going around the park and doing various things and riding on the train. And then we'd get ourselves something to eat. Taffy apples, too, they had. And so we'd get ourselves all set up, and then we'd kind of like take a little break. And quite often the grandmother would be sitting by the fire. She would just kind of hang out and shoot the breeze with us. And she always got a kick out of Kat and Maddie. So, we'd have a fun time with that. And we got to know these people over time. Now, unfortunately, we're talking about the early 2000s, and if you know your American history, you know that 2007, 2008, we had what was called the financial meltdown, and that had to do with like housing, but also all sorts of other things within the economy. Many people lost their jobs, and what we found is, the pumpkin patch place did stay open, but it was one of those things that was kind of dependent on, you could call it tourist money if you want, but it wasn't all tourists. It was all sorts of other local people. And it wound up being one of those luxuries that I think a lot of people, as budgets got tighter and people lost their jobs, just wasn't in the cards anymore. And we went back a couple times. I'll also mention one other thing too. I mean, it was a pumpkin farm. So they had like a huge selection of pumpkins and gourds. Kat would always get a white pumpkin. I would usually get a nice big one. We'd carve the stuff. And so they were, growing these on their farm, and probably also buying some from local farmers. All of that started getting more and more shrunken. There would be less available. And after a while, you could tell that they were kind of struggling. There were fewer people there. There wasn't as much to eat and drink. There was talk about whether they would be able to open it the following year. And eventually it did close up, in fact. We went back one time, probably, I want to say in the 2010s, and it was completely gone. There was no more. I mean, the place was there, but there wasn't any of the stuff that we had become accustomed to seeing there. And I asked my relatives about that, and they said, "Yeah, I think it closed down." Unfortunate, one of many, many casualties of the financial crisis that we went through. But for a long time, that was something that we would look forward to every year, going back to the pumpkin farm and doing all of these things together. And we would manage, in an average October, to get 3 or 4 visits in and to really enjoy ourselves. And, it was cool that now Kat is 21. They still remember it fondly. There's a lot of things that my kids don't remember that we did in the past, but that is one of the things that stuck with them, perhaps because of the repetition, perhaps because it made a big impression on them. And, was it like the best or some unique pumpkin farm and Halloween place? Probably not. I mean, there's tons of these places all over, but it was special for us. And, it was maybe about a 15-minute drive across country roads as the trees were turning, as the grass was becoming brown and red and, changing into different colors. So it was always connected with a time and space and part of our way of living together back then. So that's my story. You might have similar places that you got to go to, and hopefully you had as much fun there as we did at this pumpkin farm.